Okay, now we're now going to get into the cover cropping portion of the meeting. I'd like to introduce Cody Nelson, the owner and founder of Soil RX. You can also watch his YouTube videos on YouTube, obviously, and they're Cover Crop Kings. Okay, on the YouTube channel, Cover Crop Kings. We first became associated with Cody and had him on a lot of farms when he was with Prairie Creek Seeds out of Cascade, Iowa. And Cody's kind of off doing his own consulting thing now. I'd like him to explain that a little bit more because you'll do it more justice than I will.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. First off, I want to ask how many of you guys have used cover crops in the past or had some experience with cover crops? Okay, most of you have. Has it all been good? Everything's been perfect and worked just the way it's supposed to? No, not so much. Okay, so that's kind of why I started my business, and that's Soil RX. Just trying to work with farmers to help them incorporate cover crops and other soil health principles and to do it profitably and to not be trying to sell you anything while I'm doing it. So that's kind of how it started. We work with several thousand acres throughout the upper Midwest. We are in both Dakotas, Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And we've been talking with a lot of other farms in different states as well. We don't always get to the farms to do. We've got different situations where we get there a lot and some we don't get there hardly at all. So just trying to help farms make this work, trying to make sure you're utilizing the right cover crops in the right situation, and also how to balance that with the right nutrients and using the right soil tests and whatnot. So that's a little bit about Soil RX. I got business cards in the back if you want to grab one of them before you go. If you got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. So anyways, we're going to really touch on 60-inch corn, and I'm going to ask for another raise of hands. How many of you have tried 60-inch corn? How many of you have thought of it? All right, well, that's good. So it's really taken off here over the last couple years. I had a client of mine ask me a couple years ago. He had read an article in a magazine called The Furrow, wondering if it was an option that I thought would work, and I'm always one that says yes before no. I got to see it not work before I tell them it won't work. So we decided to kind of work out a plan and see how we could make it work, and it was not a complete failure, so we decided to take it to the next level. So we're going to talk about that. This is actually a field out in eastern South Dakota. We're going to talk about that particular field an awful lot today because that's one we got some pretty good data off of, but we're seeing a lot of things in what to do and what not to do. So first we got to look at why are we doing some of the stuff that we're doing. And I look at it, those are my three kids there. I got Amelia, Coy, and Jace, and I'm doing some of this stuff on my farm because I'm trying to build the soil for the future generations. I want to do whatever I can to make sure we improve it for them, and I'm going to lose them off the farm if I don't make sure they're profitable and able to make a living. So my goal is to make my operation successful enough that I have the opportunity to bring them back. So with that, we can't keep doing the same thing we've been doing over and over again. We got to make some changes. And so with that, we're going to talk a little bit about carbon sequestration. So what do you think your farm is? I look at every farm, every acre as a solar panel, and I want to make sure we're always capturing every last little bit of solar energy. So I want to make sure we got a living root on the ground, in the ground at all times, and we're always trying to capture carbon out of the atmosphere and then pump it back through the root exudates into the soil. That's where you're going to have your highest percentage of carbon that turns into organic matter is going to come in through your root exudates. So by doing that, we always need to make sure that we have that living root. So we want to make sure we have a living root as long as possible, and that'll give us the most carbon sequestration possible. Interesting thing about carbon I just recently learned is when the plant starts to get more size, we think of that plant material above ground as carbon as well, and a very low percentage of that ever actually turns into organic matter. So the optimum stage is actually when that cover crop is a short cover crop. So everybody thinks we need to have a big 3-4 foot tall cover crop to be a successful one. 3 to 4 inches might be our most successful cover crop in terms of carbon sequestration. So some of those failures that we think about a cover crop might not be a failure, but I do want to help you to grow a bigger cover crop, especially if we're going to try and look at it as a feed source for livestock. So here's another way we can do that, and this, I am getting to the 60-inch corn, but why I really gravitated towards the 60-inch corn is we were doing a lot of stuff where we were interseeding into corn early, but we weren't getting a cover crop that overwintered because of the shade tolerance. So we had to come back and seed another cover crop after we harvested the corn. So essentially we were planting our corn, we would come back and interseed early, then we'd come back again and plant the overwintering cover crop, whether it's rye or triticale or any winter crops, and then we'd come back and plant beans again. So we were basically, what we were doing is we were planting 3 times to get 1 harvest, and that got to be a lot of planting. So I really thought if we could do this all at once with 60-inch corn, maybe we could grow we could interseed all the cover crops at the same time, and we've been having pretty good success with that. So with success, we need commitment. So anytime you want to succeed in anything that you do, you have to commit, right? Everybody commits to, every successful athlete is committed to taking a chance and going to the next level. And that's really, anybody that's going to try 60-inch corn is really willing to commit, whether it's a few acres or something. They're going to commit to change a little bit. And whenever we commit to making a change on our farm, we have a higher, definitely a lot higher success rate. So we got to look at some of the principles of soil health, and we don't always have to hit each one of these every year, but we want to try and hit as many of them as possible throughout the years. And whether we're keeping the soil covered, minimizing disturbance, plant diversity, continual living root, and livestock integration. And like I said, some farms may never have some of these on their farm, but we definitely want to do whatever we can to have a higher percentage of that. These 60-inch rows gives us an opportunity to get more of these covered every year. So some of the keys to planting our 60-inch corn. Even seed emergence. Even emergence is always important, but it's twice as important with 60-inch corn. So a little bit about how we're getting this accomplished. We are planting the same amount of corn per acre. So our seed populations are the exact same as they were in 30s, but now we're in 60s. So we're shutting off every other row, and we are doubling the population. So if you're on 30,000, you're on 60,000 per row. Does that make sense, everybody? So now you go from having your corn plants, say they're 6 inches apart to 3 inches apart. So it's even more crucial that everything comes up at the same time. So we saw some issues with that last year just because of the really poor planting conditions we had. We saw that as really important. If we can get an even emergence, that's really good. So a lot of our successful 60-inch corn plots, we had delta downforce on. We had perfect seed placement. That was really beneficial. Planting conditions, that all kind of goes together. No-till versus till, we actually had a lot better situations in our no-till because we had better early season weed control. So that's one thing to think about, and we're going to see some pictures of that. Population, we touched on that. We want to make sure that we maintain the exact same population that we were doing in the 30s. As a matter of fact, that we might see some positive benefits to actually increasing the population a tick if possible. Nutrient application, you want to make sure you got your nutrients as close to the row as possible. That really depends on where you're at in terms of your soil health. And what we've already learned today, as long as your soil is healthy, that can be completely dependent on that. And then hybrid selection. We really need to at least have a moderate to a high flex hybrid. I would not, if you're not dealing with a flex hybrid, I absolutely would be very cautious about trying to make it work in a 60-inch corn. So this is just one of the fields that we're planting. This is the field out in eastern South Dakota, or one of the fields in eastern South Dakota. And I'm just going to show several pictures throughout here what this looks like. We were able to lift up every other row, so we weren't disturbing the soil in that. This field here was wheat with a cover crop last year that winter killed, and then we're just able to come back in. And did have very good weed suppression there. Here we're coming back, and they had side dressed it. Here's, as you can see here, we'd actually run through and interseeded, and the cover crops are already starting to emerge. We really like to do this, I would say, around V3 to V4, somewhere in there. We've gone as early as V2 and not seen a negative effect, and the nice thing about 60-inch rows is we can go a little bit later too. It all depends on the equipment that you have. Notice cover crops are definitely the keys to success with this, because if you do not have a cover crop in this row, if you don't have something growing in between 60-inch rows, you're going to grow something you don't want. So you got to have a plan on what you want to do this to make it work. So I should talk now too about why 60-inch row ever got started. It actually had nothing to do with cover crops. Bob Recker down in Iowa was actually looking at how could he increase yields in a corn setting. And he noticed as he walked into the cornfield, the biggest ears were always on the outside. So how can we create more outside rows? He looked at several different figurations of how to plant different row spacings, and 60-inch corn is kind of where he hit it. But I'm not saying we're going to get a higher yield, but I definitely think it's possible that we can maintain the corn yield by doing this. His biggest issue was actually the fact that he didn't have very good weed control. One of his cooperators wanted to try cover crops, and that's kind of where these two went hand in hand, and they hit it off pretty well. So this is just another picture as the cover crop's getting established, and we're seeing some substantial growth. This is in late June. This particular field was planted, I think it was planted the 4th of May. Now we're in the latter part of July. I think it was like 28th of July. We had a field day out there. And one thing that we noticed is this is the corn, the ears in the 60-inch versus the 30. So I was really starting to get excited at this point in time when I saw this. I thought maybe we are going to have higher yields. Maybe we can start looking at later maturing corn, because we were seeing a lot of things throughout the year. But one thing we were really seeing was improved plant health. And when we saw that improved plant health, we were just thinking we were going to speed up maturity. We were going to have a lot of benefits from that. So that was one way we were looking at possibly increasing the yield by using a later maturing corn. And here's another picture the day after that. So this is a week after that, and you can see the millet starting to seed out. So we had a ton of biomass out there. Like I said, the corn plants were extremely green. We were seeing a lot of yellowing in the 30-inch corn, but the plant health was tremendously better as we got into the 60s. And how much growth did we get? In that particular plot, we had 23,000 pounds of biomass, but it came out to 6,500 pounds of dry matter per acre. So that was tremendous. We did not, in that plot, we did not even try to do a cover crop in the 30-inch rows because we were trying to compare what are we looking at? Are we comparing cover crop in 30s to cover crop in 60? We wanted to compare what the yield was going to be in a cover crop with a 60 versus no cover crop in the 30, because that's more of a conventional situation. Another plot we did in Iowa on the 60-inch, we had 3,300 pounds of dry matter. Versus 30-inch, we had 320 pounds of dry matter. So now we're definitely producing enough feed. And I know in South Dakota, the hay cost, or we valued the price there at $120 a ton. So even if we do have a little bit of a yield drag, if we're going to have some extra feed off of this, we're going to probably offset that. So in that mix that we had here, and I just want to show this to show you what we had in that mix. I don't believe this is the right answer for the right cover crop for that situation, and I'm going to touch on that and talk why. But medium red clover, we had buckwheat, we had cowpeas, German foxtail millet, hairy vetch, oats, rape, sun hemp, flax, and annual ryegrass. So we need diversity. Anytime we can add more diversity, we want to add more diversity. I don't think we need to have, maybe we don't need to have 30, 40 way blends, but we definitely want to have more than this. I also want to say this, I'm not sure that we should ever interseed a warm season grass when our cash crop is a warm season grass. Part of the thought behind having 60-inch corn is capturing sunlight and better managing sunlight. Well, when we're doing that process properly, every leaf all the way down to the bottom of the plant is capturing sunlight. When in this situation, if I backed up to a picture earlier, we were seeing that millet was growing and covering up some of the bottom leaves of that corn, not allowing that to capture the sunlight to its fullest potential. So if we're to redo this mix, one thing that I would really like to look at is canceling out any of the warm season grasses, which in this case would just be millet. I would like to add more or a higher percentage of warm season legumes so we could use that and just maybe add some more diversity. I really like the annual ryegrass in there, but in this situation with the millet, the annual ryegrass and the well, we didn't have I thought we had cereal rye in there too, but I would like to have winter cereal rye in the mix as well, so that winter cereal rye can come back and overwinter. But you have to identify what your goals are. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to get improved grazing, increased grazing on your land? That's where a lot of the producers that are really looking at 60-inch corn, they really want to increase their grazing potential. Weed control. We've got several organic producers that are wanting to look at this as a weed control option. Maybe they go back and forth 60 inches or 30 inches and grow a diverse cover crop in between. Maybe we want to fix some nitrogen. Do we want it to overwinter? Do we want it to winter kill? And then ultimately we want to add that diversity. So this is a picture of what it looked like late season. This was in September. Here, this is right as we were starting to harvest. And the pictures maybe don't do it near as much justice, but there was still an awful lot of biomass in between the rows. That's what it looked like post-harvest. So now we want to talk about, are we trying to interseed? Do we really want to do warm seasons or do we want to do cool seasons? This is what our cool season mix looked like in southern South Dakota. This was about 100 miles south of where the warm season mix was. And this one was it was winter cereal rye, annual ryegrass, hairy vetch, red clover. We did no warm seasons in it whatsoever. I will tell you, and this is the only picture I have of this field, but this one, we did have some weed pressure because the cool seasons just didn't have enough. Just didn't have enough biomass to suppress that. But in this picture, this is in west central Minnesota. This would be up by Glenwood. Here we had a diversity of both cool season grasses and warm season legumes. And this is probably the best stand that we had of everything. And this was also our best yielding stuff in comparison. Now this was 44-inch row versus 22. Here's another picture of that. So the nice thing about the big reason we started 60-inch corn was so you didn't have to buy new equipment. Has anybody got excess money out here that wants to buy new equipment? We really want to try and use what you have on your farm. So that's why we have a lot of 44-inch plots. We have a lot of 60-inch plots. Next year we're going to have some 40s. But it all depends on what you have for a planting system and a harvesting system. We don't want you to buy anything new. Just shut off every other row. That's the goal behind this. So we talked about the value of tillage in this system. This is where we did 30-inch strip till with 60-inch corn. That's not a cover crop that was interseeded in between the rows. That's actually just weeds. So look at the weed suppression we had from the residue the year before. And then when we got into the strip till, we were able to get that better weed growth, you might say. So what about interseeders? That's always the big question. What are we using for an interseeder? And we have several different interseeders that we're working with throughout all of our farms. Here's one. This is what that one's done. A lot of these are homemade interseeders. Here's one that was set up as a 66-inch interseeder. There's all kinds of different ways we can turn stuff around. There's a couple others. This is my favorite one. Maybe not that one exactly, but I think oftentimes we forget about what we already have. I would probably go in before this corn is that tall, but if you go into V2 corn and you knock a little bit down, is it going to come back? pretty much always going to come back. We've seen corn hailed off at much higher than that. A lot of times we're just taking drills out. Sometimes we'll restructure them. Sometimes we'll take off some units. Sometimes we won't. And just go back out and get your cover crop interseeded into that. And we have very good successes with just running a drill over it. So go find an old press drill or something like that and just seed some cover crops. Here's an Lilliston cultivator that was set up. They were set up to side dress and put a Valimar box on it and could seed covers at the same time. Old rotary hoe that was set up with a Gandy box on it. This was originally set up for 30 inch. Now that's set up for 44 inch. It's a long story, but they just switched they went all the way to 44, and they actually built a 44-inch row planter specifically for this and set everything up on that. They were having all their custom harvesting done anyway, so they just had to switch harvesters. So we look at a lot of different stuff. What's the best option? So is it 44 inch? Is it 60 inch? Is it 30-60? Is it 30-30, 60-60? Is it twin row 60? I don't know that there's an actual answer, but there's positives and there's benefits to both, and there's negatives to both. I can tell you with this situation, we saw really good cover crop stands in the 60s, but we ran the same population and we ran 2/3 the row. So we basically had 2 picket fences here with all sorts of sun here, but we couldn't get very much cover crop growth in the 30s in between those 60s. So the next year we had tremendously more weed growth in the 30s than we did where we had the good cover crop. So that maybe wasn't the best situation. So now we had to manage it all like it was that, and we couldn't take the advantage that we got out of the 60 inch. Does that make sense? So that's why we decided let's stick with the straight 60, or let's go to the straight 44, because it is actually easier. It does help to have variable rate drive on your planter. It does help to have delta. There's some values to having some of that improved technology on your planters. But once you've got that technology on your planter, you've got the access, the capability to do this a little bit better. And then you get an even cover crop stand throughout the whole field. And I think that's oftentimes what we forget about, is that even cover crop stand is a lot of times way more valuable than we give it credit for. We want to have every last square inch capturing sunlight, not just part of it.
Hey Cody, one thing I noticed about that picture, other than different than the other ones, is there's actually a hill on that one.
There is. We don't have near the hills that you guys have. But we do have some. So anyways, that can be a challenge with interseeding, right? And maybe that's why we need to go earlier, so we can, and whether we're using a drill or whatever we're doing, but we definitely need to go earlier so it can follow the rows a little bit better. So do you guys have any questions on any of this? Oh, you guys can go later.
Are you using any chemical weed control at all, or just relying on the drill?
Oh, we're using, every farm is a little bit different, but we are definitely using some. That gets to be a big difference between farm to farm. We put some blanket ones together, herbicide plants together, and what we saw is, as you guys won't be surprised about, if it's a 3% organic matter or an 8% organic matter, there's a big difference there in how that chemical reacts. So I'm not going to give out a blanket recommendation of what we could do, but we definitely want to try and find stuff that has shorter residuals. I will say that. So that way we can get out there and get our cover crop planted earlier. And honestly, the best stand that we had, and I'm not real excited about it, but the best stand was when we just came out and used glyphosate right before planting of the cover crop. Because there's not a lot of residual for a lot of these cover crops in that. So we did a lot of different stuff. Some we're not using any and getting along really good, but it all depends on what the weed pressure is on that farm. That's where I've got one of my producers swears up and down you should do this after wheat only, because he gets a lot better weed suppression from his wheat crop. So thinking about the true rotation and how everything works on your farm, I'd be a little nervous to go into a real dirty farm and one with a lot of weeds and make this work, because you are going to expose a lot more soil to sunlight, and that could be an issue. Now you guys,
If you're lifting up every other row, how are you adjusting for your marker or guidance to compensate for that?
There again, if you're lifting up every other row, how do you do the guidance with that? And it depends on how your system's set up. Sometimes we can just plug it in on the guidance. I was actually I don't have that on my farm, so I was actually running. I didn't adjust the guide marker at all. I just either you straddle the marker. I was actually driving on it with a tire every other time as I turned around. You just kind of did some math, and you find a way to make it work, but it's not always perfect. Does that make sense?
You showed a lot of different pictures of the interseeding, different things, whether it's a drill or blowing on with a Gandy, and it looks like you got this going on, or just a broadcast with Gandy. Do you see any differences in those systems as far as better establishment and or better weed control?
Yeah. Anytime you stir the soil up, you do not get as good a weed control. So if you were drilling the seed into the soil specifically, you had much better weed control than maybe like the Lilliston cultivator or the rotary hoe. We probably had the most weeds with, because I feel like we were probably pulling weeds out at the time, but we were also reseeding them, right? So I'm not done yet. There's still a few more here. So one thing to talk about here on the yields, we did see anywhere from a 1% increase to a 13% decrease. I think planting conditions, as I touched on before, are going to be huge on this. So, like I said, if you have good planting conditions, it's way easier to make this work, just like everything else. But where we saw the 13% decrease, we kind of did everything wrong. Now, that's still where we had excellent cover crop stands, and we could extend our grazing off of that tremendously, so that part was going to be beneficial. Most of these were in 200 yield environments, or 200 bushel yield environments, so we're not just doing this on the poorer quality ground. We want to see how far we can push the limits, and I think the top yielding we saw this year was 213 on our 60-inch corn, so it is capable of producing high yields. We got to remember planting is crucial. We got to figure out why we're doing it and what we're doing and how we're going to do it before we actually go ahead and get it done. So, has anybody thought about grazing corn? Yeah? So, this is kind of a new concept, and I've been watching some farmers in Canada really take to this, and this is actually a producer up in Barnesville that did this last year, but here they grazed 44-inch corn. They planted every other row of soybeans. Then they broadcast the ryegrass, and the ryegrass germinated and died. So it was essentially just planting corn. They planted it after they harvested the rye for silage. And they actually, in this situation, went around to all the seed dealers and found leftover seed corn from plots or whatever. So they had very low cost on their seed. And I think this was a June planting. They just did 21 acres and got 40 days of grazing with 160 head of cows, which equivalates to 6,400 cow days or 305 cow days per acre. So what's the cost? What's your gross? What's your net? I know South Dakota State's claiming it costs $2.25 to $3 a day to feed a beef cow, this winter. I don't know what Minnesota's costs are. I know my costs are less than that, but I'm still grazing. So let's say we use $2 a day on, if we could get 305 cow days per acre, we're looking at a $600 gross. Well, if you had, say you had 200 bushel of corn and you sold it for $4, you were going to gross 800. But here you took all the nutrients and you had to combine it and you had to haul it to town and you probably had to pay for drying this year. What's the value? What about the nutrients that you left there? What about getting the cows out on the ground? What are some other options? How else could we do this? I'm thinking maybe we could plant a diverse warm season or cool season crop, say like oats, peas, barley, flax, wheat, you name it. Take it, chop it late June, come back in, plant 44 or 60 inch corn, come back in a couple weeks and plant your turnips and radishes and hairy vetch and your other cover crops. And then you can strip graze this through the winter. So now you produced a little bit of feed, and you could just run the cows out doing something like this. Probably set it up for a pretty good crop the next year. Anybody think they'd try something like that? Yeah? I think that might work. We're going to try that next year. So we keep trying to push the envelope a little bit and seeing what we can do to break the system, because we don't want to keep doing the same thing we've always been doing. And I think this is a pretty neat idea. So, we got any more questions? Yes.
Cody, I don't know if it is anymore, there was a misconception that the farther north you go, you can't do this.
Yeah.
You mentioned you were in South Dakota, and then you moved 100 miles south, still in South Dakota, so how far were you there?
Yeah, so that the main picture is in Millbank, and it's funny you say that. They're doing it in North Dakota. I've got growers up close to Canada that are making this stuff work, and I think you guys are pretty close to Florida, so you ought to have plenty of time down here. So I'm 4 hours northwest of here, and the thing is, this is why we have to do some things different. If you're just going to do corn and soybeans, you can get a cover crop to work. It's just not going to do you as much good. If you went in to your corn ground after you combined it and broadcast or seeded rye, or say you drilled rye or broadcast it and run the cows across it or something like that, you're going to get a stand of rye next spring, but it's probably not going to get overly big. If you want it to get bigger, you can plant your beans into it and let the rye grow up, continue to grow, especially if it's a wet year. You can get some carbon sequestration out of it. You can improve your soils over it, but sometimes you got to make some drastic changes in order to see major successes, like I touched on before. And doing stuff like this, you're going to have a lot higher success rate with getting a cover crop established, improving your soil health, and in return, cycling more carbon, so therefore you can cut back your input costs. And that's when we start making more money. That's when you stay on the farm longer. I can tell you a little bit about my operation. I run a cow-calf and farm operation out in west central Minnesota. We work with not only do we graze our own acres, but we're always trying to graze somebody else's cover crops. I'm convinced I'm bringing them more value than I'm bringing myself, but I'm also here not feeding cows right now, so that's not so bad either. I think I still got about a month to a month and a half worth of feed yet to graze, and if anything worked out the way I want it to, maybe by then I got some rye starting to green up. It's possible. I don't know if that'll work or not, but now this is my first year doing it. This year was a lot because of the prevent plant that we had, but we took advantage of it, and we took advantage of every opportunity that we had. We had about 500 acres fenced in, and we had a little over 100 cows out grazing, and we put up a lot of poly wire and temporary fence and moved cows all over the place, but we got it done, and that's why we're still grazing. So we had to build a lot of that fence beforehand. We're still strip grazing and moving fence, but a little DeWalt drill and some re-rod posts go right in the ground just fine right now when it's frozen. And actually underneath these cover crops, there's only about 2 inches of frost. So we get through a little bit of frost and then them posts slide right in. We have not hauled manure on our cow-calf operation for about 4 years now. And in the winter we do a lot of bale grazing, and I never feed in the same spot twice. So the bales are either rolled out or they're set out throughout the pasture strategically, so that way we can make sure that the cows. My belief is the cows have 4 legs for a reason. They can go out and get their own feed, and they can haul their own manure. I want them to work for me. I don't want to work for them. And in return, they're improving our soils. The one pasture that we picked up 4 years ago, right close to our place there, we're actually running, we've got 400% better production than we did when we picked it up. So they used to run 12 pairs from green up till the weekend before deer season, I guess. And like I say, we've quadrupled the production on that ground just by doing that. We haven't put anything else on it outside of feed. So there's a lot of different things we can do and a lot of different things we can look at as livestock producers. But we can also, even if you're not livestock, we can still increase the yield. But everybody's got livestock on their ground. It's just whether or not you got to take care of it or not. Manually with that, we've got lots of soil biology there that we got to take care of as well. Yeah.
You have a lot of silage produced in this group.
Okay.
You have much data or experience with 16-inch roll and corn.
Yeah, so we're picking up more and more people doing different stuff with this. I'm going to have a lot of data on 60-inch corn with silage next year because we have several people that are going to use that to try to change what they're doing and try to increase their diversity. So one thing with that, if you got 60-inch corn, you can put a lot of stuff in between there. Now maybe we do need to get back into some of those warm season grasses to mix in if you're going to chop it and harvest it. And you're not just looking at corn yield, you're just looking at total tonnage per acre and total product and quality of product per acre. Then we can start adding some of the, forage sorghum sedans, cowpeas, I don't know about hairy vetch so much, but sun hemp would be another good option. But definitely increase that diversity so you can add that stuff, add different stuff to the diet. One thing that we noticed as soon as we started grazing these diverse cover crops is our cow health improved dramatically. Whether I'm a beef cow operation, but whether you're a beef cow operation or a dairy, diversity is going to improve everything. So I don't know how your nutritionist is going to handle that. And you can figure out rations with that, right? Yeah, you'll be fine. So just anytime you get a chance to add something else to the diet, there's most likely going to be some sort of benefit from it. In terms of tonnage, oh yeah, go ahead. So I tried that. I didn't have luck with it, but I got to try it again because I think I did it wrong. The question was planting alfalfa in between the corn for chopping, right? So do you know if they were doing wide row corn? You don't think so? Yeah. Yeah, my alfalfa was not that tall. But I definitely, I've seen some reports on that. I think that's an awesome idea, and that's going to be a pretty close to a perfect diet, right? Especially for some of these cows. So, yeah, no, I think that's a viable option. And like I said before, I don't ever want to say anything doesn't work until I've seen it not work several times, because I think a lot of times we try it once, maybe we did it wrong, maybe our management wasn't perfect, and we got to keep trying it until we get it right, because I think a lot of times there's a way to make something work. Yeah.
Is there enough distance there, or if you put the alfalfa in a corn and alfalfa, and you harvest all of it, that the next year you can come back corn on corn for a couple, 3 years then, or no? Is there going to be enough diversity in that soil that we can go corn on corn? That's the biggest question.
With alfalfa in between? Yeah, no, so if you do 60-inch corn with a diverse cover crop, I absolutely think you'll have enough diversity. And I mean, I don't know how diverse that's got to be, whether it's a 3-way mix or a 8-way mix or something like that. I think you'll have enough. You're going to increase that soil biology enough that you're definitely going to offset the idea of the corn-on-corn issues. And you're going to move over 30 inches, right? You're not just going to plant right on top of the old. I think I would move over 30 inches. If you're going to do corn-on-corn and just bounce back and forth, we can get our crop rotation along with that. My thought is like an 8-way mix. I really like the idea of 8-way blends. So, yeah.
That alfalfa part, I don't know if that's what you were seeing, but if University of Wisconsin is doing, or alfalfa establishing, doing it during the last year of your corn, so that after you chop that corn off, then you got your alfalfa there, so you don't have that initial drag for your plant for the year. That's what that particular one is. Then you're gonna have your regular alfalfa stand and then come back into whatever your crop rotation is.
Okay. So that's, yep. So I think I've seen something on that, and it does make sense. That first year of alfalfa is always a drag. So if you can get something off of that, and sometimes even if we did 60-inch row at 20,000 population, backed off the population a little bit, did a high flex corn, you might have enough silage where it's still going to be a benefit. That'll be way better than your normal year one alfalfa. I think that's a viable option for sure. Yes. Not last year. This year, several of them are. So, yeah. So were any of the 60-inch row corn farmers organic? And I said last year there was not any. This next year there's several. So they're really thinking that's going to be their opportunity to increase the years of corn grown organically, with still increasing that plant diversity. So we're looking in that situation where we're probably going to be planting. We're going to look at it as several different fields throughout the farm with a row of corn with a very diverse cover crop blend, and then another field with corn with a diverse cover crop blend, and then just move over 30 inches every year and see how it goes. I don't know that we're going to try that on really, really large scale, but I know there's going to be some guys that are going to be several hundred acres of it. So maybe that's fairly large scale, I guess. But it depends on everybody's situation and how they quantify that. Either small grain. I know one in particular was peas, but small grain with complex cover crops, or actually a lot of it was set up this summer in prevent plant. So it gave them an opportunity. So I think the goal for a lot of producers that I'm working with is, and maybe they have different reasons behind it, but the no-till organic thing is really picking up steam. How can we get to no-till organic or reduce till organic? Maybe, just we want to make sure we're doing less tillage all the time. Well, this might be the opportunity between that, using that diverse cover crop to kind of use it as a smother crop as well. Come back in and plant, maybe whether we're using a flamer or something like that. And even my conventional growers, we want to use less herbicide. My no-tillers want to use less herbicide. The organic folks want to use less tillage. I think everybody's trying to do the same thing, maybe for a little bit slightly different reasons, But I think this is going to be a step to make that work. If we want to take it to the next level, we could start talking perennials in between 60-inch corn, because I do think that's going to be the next step in this. We don't know how that looks yet. I'm going to try some on my pasture ground where we're going to try putting it together. So I've got some pasture ground that's predominantly all cool seasons. We can grow some tremendous early season crops, and then in the summer it just kind of dies off. It doesn't do much at all. So my thought is we'll come in there late summer, try the 60-inch corn there, figure out how to set back the perennials enough without using any herbicides or tillage. I haven't figured this out yet. We're going to have to use a little bit of one or the other. But we want to try and get that set up. We've got a 6-row planter set up that we're going to probably mount a kind of a strip till rig in front of it and make that work. So that's what we're going to try next year. That's one of the things we're going to try next year. So I like to try the really crazy stuff first before I tell you guys all about it. So I'll come back next year and let you know how it goes. Any other questions? So this is some of my stuff here. A little bit, again, about what we do. We've got cover crop and soil health consulting at Soil RX. We also do some land management where we're really focused on connecting absentee landowners with producers like yourself. They're trying to incorporate cover crop principles or soil health principles and regenerative principles on your land. We do a lot of custom cover crop blending and different recommendations. You can learn more about us at soilrx.net. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. and we have our Cover Crop Kings channel on YouTube. So if you want to follow us there, you can subscribe to the channel and try and bring as many videos as we can. Try to get one up every couple weeks. So that's all I got.
One of the questions I have, Cody, is that we have, I know, on my own ground, on the ground that we run organically, and a couple other guys, we don't really have the opportunity to get some of the livestock out there, so we have to harvest that crop and bring back. So, for instance, my organic ground last year was in corn. Now we want to come back this year and we're thinking like an oats and peas blend early in the spring, harvest that, put a manure application down, and what would be that ideal blend to get, we want to harvest again, say September, that would give us nitrogen fixation for the next year, but yet a good crop for raising heifers on. Do your magic.
When do you want to take the first harvest?
That first harvest will probably be, say, oats and peas, second, third week of June. So you got to get the manure out there, that take a week, up to a week. Well, you got to work it in.
He sleeps too much, I think. You sleep too much.
But then, so let's just say we're seeding again third week of June.
Okay, so we're going to seed the third week of June, or let's just say the 1st of July, just to be safe. Do we want to seed a cool season crop the 1st of July? Not really. I've done it several times, and it doesn't work very well. So that's going to kind of eliminate some of the stuff. And we already did cool seasons, right? So we know we've got cool season broadleafs, cool season grasses, and we got warm season broadleafs, warm season grasses. Currently in our cash crop rotation, we have a warm season grass and a warm season broadleaf, corn and soybeans. So how can we add more diversity? You want to try to produce some nutrients for the next year's crop.
Let's just say something that would be a little bit, at least part of it be nitrogen fixation for the next year's crop. Remember, we put a manure application out there, so I'm really not worried about a lot of nitrogen.
Yeah.
And I've covered my phosphorus and potassium needs. And
Yeah. So
what we're getting in the recycling of the calcite that we're putting down.
Yep, and we know that crops use carbon first, right? So we really want to cycle as much carbon as we can. We can almost, in that situation, I think we can almost eliminate the nitrogen, correct? Production, right, from the morning? Okay, so we still wanted some legumes because we want some diversity. So I would say a mixed, I would have cowpeas, I would have sorghum Sudan, I would have Sudan grass. If you knew you were going to get it chopped before a freeze, would you say that would happen? If we were very confident in getting it chopped before a freeze, I would add millet. If we weren't, I wouldn't, because millet's really good at sending all the sugars right back down in the root zone, and we won't have it in the plant there to harvest it, which is still going to be good for soil health, but it's not going to be good for feed quality. I might put corn in there. Possibly, just a little bit. But the corn, if you were to do corn, do you need more corn silage? Then we wouldn't do that probably. So stick with the warm season grasses. You could stick with cowpeas. We could probably put some sun hemp in there as well. We need 45 to 60 days for that sun hemp. So that's going to give us adequate time for that. We'll have all of July and all of August. That's going to kind of be the base. We might add some other things with it. I'm not going to add a lot of brassicas in that at that point in time, especially how we're going to harvest it. We're not going to put, I'm not sure I definitely wouldn't do like a turnip or a radish. You could potentially add a kale or something like that. But I don't know how much value we're going to see in that. Is this for milk cows or dry cows? Heifers, okay. Non-lactating dairy cows, okay.
And some of the other kind of for them it would be cow-calf.
Yep. What's the majority you have livestock, correct? Yeah? No? 50-50, okay. But the ones that don't have livestock aren't going to be in this situation anyhow. So, but for those that don't have livestock, how many of you, raise your hands, would let somebody else put their livestock on your land? couple. Okay. I think you guys would get the bigger benefit out of that by letting somebody else bring their livestock on the land. Those cows can do some amazing things in a short period of time to get them out there. Otherwise, obviously, you can get manure. But, so yeah, does that answer your question, though? Yeah.
Any more questions for Cody?
Yeah, on that idea of us guys without livestock, allowing livestock on our land, what would be a fair per head per day charge for that?
How much would you have to pay to get the cows on your land? Oh. So it really depends on the entire situation. So when I go onto somebody else's land, I look for two things. First off, I look for shelter because we're out in the plains. There is no trees it was all planted. There's no hills. So I look for shelter, and that might just be a shelter belt. And then I look for access to water. Now, I know a lot of cows go all winter without drinking water, especially as you get up into Canada. But until we have adequate snowfall, I want to make sure we have a water source. After that, obviously fence. I'm not worried about putting up temporary fence. That doesn't bother me at all. And then who's going to take care of it? So I would say a range, depending upon who takes care of what. In a situation like that, it might be worth, it seriously could be worth, hey, if somebody's going to come graze my field and I don't have to do anything, I don't need anything for it. I'm getting the most benefit if I'm doing everything and it's my cover crop and I paid for the seed and I did all that stuff, I've seen as high as $1.25 per cow per day. Now, I've seen cows put on some tremendous weight gains going into winter post-weaning. So there's a lot of value on the cow-calf side as well. There's a lot of value, and then we get into the upper plains or upper Midwest to have a couple extra body condition scores on them cows going into winter. So it's kind of a wide range, but if you're going to do everything and you're going to supply everything and you're going to take care of the water and moving the cows and doing all that, I would say on the very high side it's $1.25 a day per cow. And on the back side, if they're going to do everything, it might be, like I say, it might be free, it might be 50 cents, it might be 75 cents. But kind of just make sure you do something that works good with both, that everybody's happy, and set it up from the beginning, because if you can set it up right from the beginning, you can have some long-term plans where you're going to be able to improve your soil health really fast, and you're going to be able to dramatically decrease your inputs over time, and you're going to keep that producer in business so he or she can keep coming back to your farm to bring in cattle. I don't remember where I saw this. I think it might have been one of your guys' deal, but science has done some amazing things, but we have still yet to replicate what comes out of the back end of a cow. And that could be said for a sheep or any ruminant or any animal, Yeah, exactly. So there's some serious value there.
Yeah, is there any resource or website out there that connects like grazers to crop guys or crop guys to grazers?
There is. The Department of Agriculture, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has a website. It's like a dating site. I don't know exactly what it is off the top of my head, but there is one for Minnesota. I know the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition has one as well, where it's a map of the state. And there's a dot on there, and if you're a cattle producer, you can click on the dot. I think it's a green dot for the livestock or for the land. If you're looking for land or if you're looking for livestock, it's like a dating site. It'll put them together, and it just has some basic parameters, and you go on there and you can look and see. I know people have hauled cattle several hundred miles to go graze cover crops. I'm not going to graze several hundred miles away, but I'm trying to find something closer to home. And as we get more people producing cover crops and into the soil health thing, we're going to see more and more opportunities. And there's not a convention out there anymore not talking about getting livestock back on the land. So there's a lot of value for both. And I actually think there's an opportunity for some young people to get back into some operations by doing some of this stuff. There's opportunities all over southern Minnesota where we have vegetable crops, canning crops, a little bit of small grains, things like that, where we can be doing diverse cover crops and we could come in and graze, even if it's grazing cull cows. I sell one operation that was custom grazing somebody else's cows on somebody else's crop field, and everybody was winning on the deal. So
I got a question for Bobby Jewell. So you did the cover crop grazing from like November through the first of the year. If I know you have perimeter fence around that, but if you had to go into that 40-acre chunk and with the stuff that you have, how long would it take you to set up a 40-acre chunk for strip grazing?
One guy could, depending on the acreage, one guy could do that, I don't know, afternoon or so if you have the right setup. I use a four-wheeler and we can just reel the wire off on that. And then once you have your semi-permanent fences set up, it only takes 20 to half hour to move cows every day.
So on what I do on that, I've got a side-by-side set up with, I use all poly wire, even for the exterior fence. I had to watch somebody else do this for a few years before I felt safe doing it. But anyways, I use the poly wire around there. I've got 5/8 fiberglass posts that I use for corner posts. And then I try to use as much fiberglass as possible because there's nothing worse than a deer running through a fence and the insulator's popping off and the wire comes back and shorts out on a steel post. So I use a lot of fiberglass around there, and if I can, sometimes I'll use the steel as temporary because I'm moving that fence periodically, so I'm getting back to that on a regular basis. But the first field I grazed this fall, it was an afternoon, and it was 112 acres, and I had brought my 6-year-old out to run the side-by-side for me. This is going to be on the internet. 16-year-old I've had driving me around, and it works good to have two people, but two people can get it done a lot quicker. Sometimes just somebody just driving the Ranger ahead for me so I don't have to get back on. But yeah, I don't know, that's probably 6 hours, I suppose.
So are you moving them every day, Cody?
I'm not moving them every day. When I moved to the last field, it was January 2nd, and I gave them a strip that I thought was, and you can do this way more scientifically than I do. I gave them a strip I thought would last a week, and it was the 28th of January when I gave them their next chunk. So it lasted considerably more, and the cows gained a lot of weight and looked really good, and the calves looked like they're 100 pounds heavier. On that note, those cows and calves were at a different field right across the road, and we got snow the day before Thanksgiving, and it got cold then, and I quit watering the cows. I just kind of watched them. And in that cover crop blend, it was a lot of brassicas. There was lots of turnips and radishes, a lot of moisture in the feed. I just watched the tank to see how often the cows would come up, and they never came up and walked around the tank, so I assumed I didn't need to water them. So they did not get watered from Thanksgiving Day, or the day before Thanksgiving, actually, until January 2nd. So it's pretty easy. I had one guy when I was dropping cows off, he told me I was working way too hard. Wouldn't it be easier to wrap it up and feed it to him so I didn't have to put all this fence up? And I said, I fenced it in an afternoon, and the cows are going out and harvesting their own feed, and they're hauling their own manure, and you want me to bale it, haul it, feed it, haul it again? I said, I'm doing this because I'm kind of lazy. Like, it's way easier to throw up a little fence to me, but I'm not a big equipment guy either, so.
So how far are you grazing that down? Are they mowing off your winter cover crop right down to nothing?
Yeah, so like right now, we've had several inches. I mean, I don't know what, we've got to be close to 45 to 50 inches of snow throughout the year, but it's obviously keeps shrinking, right? So I would say we're grazing it down to about 6 inches. And at one time before it froze, it was 12 feet tall. Because there's a lot of sorghums and sorghum sedans. I mean, it was a tall cover crop. I don't know what's going to happen when we lose more of that snow. Are they going to come back and want to graze more of it? That's a conversation that has to be had with the livestock producer and with the row cropper. And if you happen to be the same person, that's a huge benefit. But I don't want to graze it down to where I don't have any protection, because I still want to have some armor on the soil, but I don't think I need as much as we used to think we did. So maybe every situation is going to be different. If you're at a big slope, obviously you want more, right? But I'm out in some pretty bare ground or pretty level ground, and I don't know that we need quite as much.
Okay, just wrapping things up, we started out with Paul talking about the recycling, and Paul emphasized the fact that it doesn't matter if it's the compost product or just the dry calcium product or the liquid products, everything that we're bringing to the party in order to get that recycling going is the structure. We went into Lawrence's talk about the science behind it, and every time I hear Lawrence's talk, I pick up on a little bit more. But he's a very intelligent man. And then finishing up with Cody, kind of talking about the diversity that we can bring into a cover cropping system, the new techniques that are available for the 60-inch rows. I would like to kind of give all these guys a round of applause, please. So that finishes up for this year. I think we're going to be coming back here again next year. We kind of found a site that's can accommodate a good-sized crowd, and I think it worked out real well. So if you guys are new here, interested, feel free to talk to Nate, myself, or Paul, and we'll get some names on and come out and visit you. But thanks much.